Senator Basi Akpan is not the only aspirant withdrawing from the race. Across the country today, as the opposition People's Democratic Party began its governorship primaries, several hopefuls pulled out, marking an interesting trend. Well, some cited imposition of candidates, use of irregular delegate lists, and court cases. Notable among those who withdrew from the primaries are Ike Ekweremadu, who refused to participate in the party's Enugu governorship race. Dati Baba Ahmed withdrew from the Kaduna governorship race, and Eyinaya Abaribe, who declined to participate in the Abia State governorship primary, citing the plan to use imaginary three-man ad hoc delegates.
All right, we're now being joined by Arise analyst Dr. Sam Amadi and, of course, Arise Director of News and Politics Editor, Sumner Sambo, to review this withdrawals. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Let me start with you, Dr. Sam Amadi. I mean, what do you make of this mass withdrawals, not just within the PDP? Some are saying that, hey, just wait a couple more hours, you may begin to see the same trend in the governing APC. But let's concentrate now on the PDP. What do you think is fundamentally going on that it looks like the chicken has come home to roost?
Well, clearly, first is the main source is that this year's primary elections are conducted in what looked like a hurry. If you look at the timeline, so usually you see this kind of rancorous congresses, and then the parties take time to sort out allegations around delegates. This delegate thing is always a war. So what happened in positions? So people will not withdraw on time. They will all keep on fighting with the national executive to sort out some of these allegations. But now you have a very strict timeline. So Congress is happening today. A primary is going to happen. Primary goes out, and the timeline for settlement is not there. So many of these those who withdraw are basically say, look, we just can't find our pathway through this election. And so in the past, you would have petitioned to the national NEC, wait out for decision, then NEC would probably postpone and have time to run an election again. So take, for example, Ike Ekweremadu. I mean, very strong politician, former deputy senate president. But again, he's run into a roadblock with the governor and with the zoning. And so there seems to be no pathway for him. Same with Eyinaya Abaribe, strong political leader, minority leader at the National Assembly, but also hitting a brick wall with the governor who comes from the same zone, who is going to be in the Senate, and therefore his campaign to be governor doesn't have a high headway. So we are seeing a couple of the fact that first, there's no time for this. Secondly, usually these three-man ad hoc delegates are product of the governors, usually the governors, and they don't have access to arrange at the national. So basically, these guys have no pathway to victory in the primaries. Okay,
Sumner Sambo, let me bring you in. Some would say perhaps the biggest withdrawal we have seen today is that of Peter Obi from the PDP presidential primary, and of course leaving the party entirely. Did that come to you as a shocker, especially because, Sumner, you reported on his travel across the country to woo delegates?
Thank you. This why it didn't come to me as a shock, because the signs have always been there. When some statements were being made, and then the reception he had in some of the states where you could see some party executives in the states being afraid of coming out to see him, or you see only a few party executives coming out to meet with him, or you will see only a few PDP stakeholders wanting to identify with him, you will know that there's a challenge there. It's majorly young people, reformists, people who see themselves as being progressives within a conservative party. They were willing to identify with him, with his campaign. And so I think it's a very difficult situation for the PDP at the moment. While it's trying to present itself to the Nigerian public as a party that's willing to be progressive in terms of some of its ideals, like restructuring, helping to ensure devolution of powers across the country, helping to give Nigerians a better economy and all of that. Nonetheless, there is a fear within some people who want reforms in the country that the PDP is not presenting itself as such party, because it should have embraced someone like Peter Obi and some of these reformists who are coming out to contest for its presidential ticket much more than it's doing. And so it looks like the Conservatives are having a field day, and that's why you could see people like Peter Obi eventually running out of the house because he thinks it's too hot for him to stay.
Yes, indeed. And Dr. Sam Amadi, does this raise the question of internal democracy, or the lack of it? Is that what's playing out? And you talked about the delegate system, wahala, you know, for want of a better word.
Sure.
Is it hurting our democracy?
Well,
Are we really mature enough to handle this delegate system in the way that it should?
I think, look, the new Electoral Act is very good. It talks about direct primary. Now, some of the APC governors are asking for, or governors are asking for direct primary for themselves. Now, what has happened is this. You see, the delegate system, the backroom of it is that you have clear membership lists. The congresses themselves are held clearly. Now, it's doubtful for me that if you do a congress, that the 3-man delegates that are met from those congresses, even if it's free and fair, would be those that will favor P2P, for example. I mean, look, Peter, all over the world, there are candidates that are general election candidates. That means they speak to larger population. They motivate larger population, but within the party, with their rules, they may not be able to win the party ticket. We saw that in the US elections, we see it every time. So the delegate system is good, but the point is you must be able to have clear register, process that's clean and clear. But if you do so, there's no guarantee that the governor who is on ground or the politician who has grassroots, impact will not win the delegates. So really, delegates the Electoral Act is wonderful. What I've done that's good now is that only elected delegates. And so you can't argue that these elected delegates are people who won the election in their community. And so if a politician looks at those delegates and he can't see who will vote for him, those are pledged delegates. That means somebody procure them, somebody asks them to run, and they are committed to somebody, then you might pull out. By the way, in the US, people drop out of very, great candidates, presumptive. People say this guy is going to be president in 2028. But something happens. He starts his campaign, he runs to a roadblock, and he pulls out. So nothing unusual to pull out if you can't find a way to the delegate parts.
And that's my question to you, Sumner. How unusual are these withdrawals that we are seeing? As brief as you can be, Sumner.
It's not unusual. I mean, we've seen that in every election cycle. Don't forget, the delegates are the real people who would actually matter at this point, because for real, if you're not in control of the delegates, no matter how much appeal you have within the voting population, it will amount to nullity. And that's why you see people like this, other governorship aspirants pulling out, because they can't be in control. And if you're going to a primary and you are not in control of 1/5 of the delegates, then automatically it means before the first ballot is cast, you've already lost. And so it's an important ingredient of democracy that the political parties need to really, reconcile with the realities on ground. If the political parties cannot offer internal democracy within their parties, then I wonder what sort of democracy we are practicing. So the Independent National Electoral Commission needs to monitor what's going on in political parties to ensure that this high number of withdrawals is curtailed. Because, I mean, why should someone spend 40 million naira to buy a form and then you don't make the environment conducive for him or her to exercise his or her voting franchise and then to ask others to vote for him or her?
Well, that's a good place to live. Someone said the political parties in Nigeria are becoming the bane to our democracy. Sumner Sambo, political editor for Arise News, and Arise News analyst Dr. Sam Amadi. Thank you, gentlemen, for being on the news tonight.